Okay, let's jump right in. It is Thursday, February 12th, 2026. And for more than a decade now, if you've been watching the global political landscape, the story of India has been, in so many ways, the story of one person.
It's completely impossible to separate the two. I mean, you trace the arc of the country from 2014 to where we're sitting right now, in early 2026, and everything is shaped by the gravitational force of Narendra Modi.
Exactly. And we've covered Indian politics on the show before, but this feels different. We're basing this deep dive on a really comprehensive retrospective that just came out this morning. It's called Narendra Modi's Political Journey, the 2014 Landslide and a Decade of Transformation.
And our goal here isn't just to, read off a timeline.
No, absolutely not. Anyone can do that. We want to understand the arc, the full 12-year story. We're going to trace it all the way from that just shocking landslide victory back in 2014 through those years of absolute political dominance and land where we are today.
Right. With Modi now in his third term, but leading a much more complicated coalition government.
It's such a fascinating journey. The source uses this phrase, a tectonic shift, and I think that's perfect. We're not just talking about an election win. We're talking about the fundamental reordering of Indian politics.
It really is. I mean, you witness the practical end of what political scientists call the Congress system, which had basically defined India since its independence.
Yeah.
And in its place, a new universe emerged with the BJP at its center. But, and I think this is the most interesting part of the analysis, that universe has had to expand and contract. It hasn't been this, straight upward line of ever-increasing power.
Not at all. It's been a real roller coaster. You have the story of a former tea seller, a chaiwala, who becomes this larger-than-life figure and completely redefines the state. You've got these massive economic shock treatments.
Things like demonetization.
That would have absolutely destroyed any other government. You have social engineering on a scale that's hard to comprehend. And now you have a return to the messy, complicated, and frankly, much more traditional reality of coalition politics.
Which is where the story gets really compelling, I think. It's about how a leader who built his entire brand on singular, decisive, almost unilateral strength, how he adapts to a world where he suddenly has to negotiate and, ask for permission.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to the moment the ground first shifted. Segment 1, the 2014 earthquake.
Earthquake is exactly the right word for it. You have to put yourself back in the pre-2014 mindset. Indian elections were, for the most part, party-centric affairs.
Right. You voted for the party symbol, the Congress hand or the BJP lotus.
Exactly. And your vote was often for your local candidate, your member of parliament, who the prime minister would be. That was often something figured out after the election by the party elites. It was a classic parliamentary system.
It functioned like one.
It did. But in 2014, the BJP, with Modi as the face of the campaign, just completely flipped the script. They took a parliamentary election and they ran it like a U.S. presidential race. It was all about one person.
And the source is clear. This wasn't an accident. This was a strategy that began to be executed way back in 2013.
Oh, absolutely. And it was, frankly, quite ruthless. In 2013, when Modi was officially made the campaign chief, it was a very deliberate move to sideline the old guard of the BJP.
You're talking about figures like L.K. Advani.
Giants of the party. I mean, Advani had been the face of the party for decades, and he was, gently but very firmly moved into the background. The signal was unmistakable. This is not your father's BJP. This is the Modi BJP. A generational shift was happening.
And in the campaign itself, looking at the data in this new report, the sheer scale of it is it's exhausting just to read about. We're talking 300,000 kilometers traveled.
The number is staggering. He personally addressed over 400 rallies. But, and this is where the source really gets into the mechanics of it, it wasn't just about physical endurance. It was how they integrated technology in a way that had never been seen before in India.
The holograms. I remember hearing about this and honestly thinking it was a bit of a gimmick.
A lot of people did. But the source argues, and I think convincingly, that it was strategic genius. It was a force multiplier.
How so?
Well, they used this 3D hologram technology to beam a life-size 3D image of Modi onto stages in multiple locations at the exact same time. So you could be in a small town in rural Bihar, and there's Narendra Modi, seemingly in the flesh, speaking directly to your community, while he's physically at a massive rally in Mumbai.
It solved the problem of geography?
It solved the biggest single problem of Indian politics.
Yeah.
The sheer overwhelming size of the country. You can't be everywhere. Well, Modi found a way to be, if not everywhere, then in 100 places at once. He achieved a kind of omnipresence.
That plays right into this image he was cultivating, doesn't it? This modern, tech-savvy, almost messianic figure.
100%. It sent a message that he was forward-looking, that he
Oh,
understood the future, and then you layer on top of that the digital campaign.
to social media.
Again, we take this for granted now in 2026, but you have to remember in 2014 this was revolutionary, especially in India. He had millions of followers on Twitter, what's now X, and on Facebook, on
Yeah.
YouTube, but the source argues that the real secret weapon was WhatsApp.
Ah, the family group chats.
The complete and total weaponization of the family group chat. The report says they used a combination of WhatsApp and bulk SMS to directly reach an estimated 100 million voters with tailored messages.
That's incredible.
But here's the nuance, the real genius of their strategy. They fuse this very high-tech, almost Silicon Valley approach with the most old-school, grassroots political machine in India, the RSS cadre network.
Let's just briefly explain for listeners. The RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, is the ideological parent organization of the BJP, right?
Correct. It's a massive, disciplined, nationwide Hindu nationalist volunteer organization. And Modi himself came up through that system as a precarious full-time worker. So you had this perfect synthesis.
So it was a pincer movement.
It was. You had Amit Shah, his chief strategist, deploying this vast army of RSS foot soldiers to go door to door to work the ground level. And at the exact same time, Modi was dominating the airwaves, the television screens, and the internet. High-tech and low-tech working in perfect sync.
And the branding, I mean, whatever your politics, you have to admit the branding was just brilliant. The chai pe charcha, the discussion over tea.
That was a masterstroke. It was turning a perceived weakness into an undeniable strength.
Because the opposition was mocking him for his background.
Yes, a prominent leader made a dismissive comment about him having been a tea seller. Instead of being ashamed of it or ignoring it, Modi's campaign leaned into it. They doubled down. They organized these chai pe charcha events, setting up tea stalls with video conferencing links where ordinary people could talk to him.
The message was, I'm one of you.
I am not one of those elites from Lutyens Delhi who went to Cambridge. I understand your life. I've lived it. It was pure populist genius.
And the slogans were so sticky. Ab ki baar, Modi Sarkar. This time, a Modi government. Very simple, very direct.
And I din an walahain. Good days are coming. It was all about hope, optimism, a clean break from the past.
Which brings us to the core messaging. He had this other slogan, minimum government, maximum governance.
Yes, that was the pitch to the urban middle class, to the business community, to the aspirational voter. You have to remember, the outgoing UPA government was just mired in corruption scandals. The 2G spectrum scam, the coal allocation scam, there was this pervasive sense of policy paralysis.
So he was pitching himself as the CEO of India Inc.,
That's a great way to put it. The guy who would cut through the red tape, fight corruption, get things done. The focus was on infrastructure, jobs, and cleaning up the system. And as the source points out, it was very strategic. They consciously moderated the hardline Hindutva rhetoric on the national stage.
The focus was development. Vikas.
Vikas, that was the word on everyone's lips. That was the ticket to power.
And boy, did it work. May 16th, 2014, the results start rolling in.
And it wasn't just a win, it was a political earthquake. The BJP, on its own, won 282 seats.
Which is more than the 272 needed for a majority.
Exactly. They didn't even need their coalition partners in the NDA, though of course they kept the alliance together. It was the first time a single party had won an outright majority in the Lok Sabha, the lower house of parliament, since 1984.
And the Congress Party was just obliterated.
Annihilated, reduced to a historic low of just 44 seats. They were so small, they couldn't even officially claim the post of leader of the opposition because you need 10% of the seats in the House for that.
Wow.
It was a total, unequivocal rejection of the old political establishment.
The symbolism of his victory started immediately, didn't it, at the swearing-in ceremony?
Yes. In a major departure from tradition, he invited all the leaders of the ARC nations, the South Asian neighbors. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was there, the President of Sri Lanka. It was the first glimpse of his neighborhood-first foreign policy.
The message being,
The message was, I'm not just another politician. I am a statesman. India is ready to lead the region. It was a statement of intent right from day one.
so he gets the keys to the kingdom. Now we move into the period from 2014 to 2015. The source titles this segment Centralization and the Structural Reset. Because as we know, campaigning is one thing, but actually governing a country of over 1 billion people is a whole other challenge.
And this is where we immediately saw that CEO of India style you mentioned come into play. The source details a very rapid, Very deliberate centralization of authority within the PMO, the Prime Minister's office.
What does that actually mean in practice? How does that change how the government works?
It means that real power shifted away from the individual cabinet ministries, the finance ministry, the home ministry, and became concentrated in the hands of the Prime Minister and a small circle of trusted bureaucrats in the PMO.
So it bypasses the traditional bureaucracy.
In many ways, yes. It was designed to streamline decision-making. No more of the endless interministerial turf wars and committees that had slowed things down for years under coalition governance. The new model was, if the PMO wants something done, it gets done, fast.
And he started taking a sledgehammer to some old institutions. The big one that the source highlights is the Planning Commission.
That was a huge symbolic move. The Planning Commission was a cornerstone of India's post-independence Nehruvian socialist era. It created these 5-year top-down plans for the economy.
A relic of a different time.
A complete relic. And Modi scrapped it within his first few months in office. He replaced it with a new body called Niti Aayog, which was framed as more of a think tank, cooperative body that would work with the states. The signal was clear. The socialist era is officially over. We are a market-friendly 21st century economy now.
The source also mentions they scrapped something like 1,200 obsolete laws.
Yeah, just cleaning out the attic. Getting rid of ancient colonial-era laws that were clogging up the system, and at the same time opening up the economy. They liberalized FDI foreign direct investment in key sectors like defense, railways, and insurance.
Sectors that had been considered sacred cows for decades.
Absolutely. So you see this pattern. Centralize power, dismantle the old, and open up for the new.
But the thing that really stands out to me from this period, and the report dedicates a lot of space to it, is how he transformed the very idea of governance into a kind of marketing exercise.
Yes. This is a key insight. Previous governments would launch schemes. Modi launched mass movements.
Right. It wasn't just, we're going to open more bank accounts. It was the Jan Dhan Yojana.
Exactly. The People's Wealth Scheme, it had a logo, it had a tagline, it had targets, and the results were insane. They opened over 125 million new bank accounts for the unbanked poor in just a matter of months. It was financial inclusion on a scale never seen before.
Or the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the Clean India mission.
That's the perfect example. He launched it on Gandhi's birthday. There were these iconic photos of him sweeping a street in Delhi. It made sanitation something that was never discussed, a topic of national conversation. He put the logo of the campaign Gandhi spectacles on every new currency note. It was about making every citizen feel like they were a participant, a stakeholder in the project of nation building.
I'm not just a beneficiary of a government scheme. I'm an active part of this movement.
Precisely. And you saw it with everything. Make in India, with its lion logo made of gears, Digital India, Skill India. Every single policy initiative was branded, packaged, and sold to the public like a product.
And it was incredibly effective at maintaining that momentum from the election campaign, wasn't it? Even when the hard economic numbers were sometimes not as spectacular as promised.
It kept the narrative of change and progress alive. It kept the enthusiasm high.
Which brings us to the next and perhaps most controversial phase of his first term. The source labels the period from 2016 to 2018 as disruption as governance. And I think we really need to pause here because this is where things get, for lack of a better word, wild.
This is the period that I think will define the economic legacy of his first 5 years.
And it all starts on one night, November 8th, 2016.
8:00 p.m. I think every single person in India remembers exactly where they were and what they were doing at that moment.
The Prime Minister appears on national television for an unscheduled address, and he announces that in 4 hours, the country's two largest currency notes, the 500 and other 1,000 rupee notes, will no longer be legal tender.
Just think about the sheer audacity of that. Overnight, 86% of the cash in circulation in the Indian economy became effectively just paper.
In a country that was overwhelmingly dependent on cash for daily transactions.
Exactly. It was an economic nuclear bomb. Now, the stated objectives were, on the face of it, quite noble. The government said it was a surgical strike on black money, on counterfeit currency used for terror financing, and it was meant to accelerate the shift to a digital economy.
But the reality on the ground, the source describes it as absolute chaos.
It was traumatic. That is the only word for it. There were endless queues outside banks as people tried to exchange their old notes. People died in those queues.
Small businesses, farmers, daily wage laborers who operate entirely in cash.
Their lives were turned upside down. Supply chains just seized up. The source estimates it knocked anywhere from 1 to 2 percentage points off India's GDP growth. By many purely economic metrics, it was a self-inflicted wound.
But, and this is the great paradox of demonetization, which the source explores so well, you would think that causing this much pain to every single voter would be political suicide, but it wasn't.
It wasn't, and this is where you see the political genius of Modi. He successfully framed the entire exercise not as an economic policy, but as a moral crusade, a Mahayajna or a great national sacrifice.
How did he manage that?
He went directly to the people, and his message was simple. I know this is causing you hardship, but your hardship is a small price to pay in our great war against the corrupt, rich people who have hoarded mountains of illegal black money. They're the ones who are really suffering today.
So he turned it into a class issue, the poor versus the rich.
Precisely. Standing in line for a few hours is your patriotic duty. And incredibly, it worked. Opinion polls at the time show that the poor, who were suffering the most, were actually the biggest supporters of the move. They believed it was hurting the rich even more.
It cemented that image of him as a decisive, strong leader willing to take tough, even painful decisions for the greater good.
Unlike the supposedly weak, indecisive coalition leaders of the past, it was a massive political gamble that paid off handsomely.
And what about the long-term outcomes? The source does say there were some structural benefits.
There were, no doubt. It gave a massive forced push to digital payments. Companies like Paytm and later the government's own UPI interface just exploded in usage. It also significantly widened the tax base because all that cash had to be deposited into bank accounts, leaving a digital trail. It accelerated the formalization of the economy.
But the human cost was immense.
The human cost was undeniably steep, and the debate over whether the benefits ultimately outweighed that cost still rages today.
And then, just as the country is starting to recover from that shock, less than a year later, in July 2017, he rolls out another massive disruption, the GST.
The goods and services tax. One nation, one tax. This was the big one.
If demonetization was a shock treatment, this was more like a fundamental rewiring of the entire system's plumbing.
It was the biggest tax reform in India's history. For decades, India's internal market was fragmented. Moving goods from one state to another was a logistical nightmare of different taxes, permits, and checkpoints.
Right.
GST replaced that entire messy patchwork with a single, unified indirect tax across the country. In principle, it was a fantastic reform that economists had wanted for years. It finally made India a true single market.
But the implementation?
The implementation was very messy. The IT network crashed. The rules were complex. There were multiple tax slabs. Small businesses really struggled to adapt. So in the short term, it was another disruption on top of the demonetization disruption.
So you have these two huge top-down economic reforms. But at the same time, the source points out this parallel track, what it calls welfare meets nationalism.
This is the absolute core of the BJP's electoral formula. While the media and the urban middle class were debating the finer points of GST compliance, the government was quietly delivering tangible benefits to the rural poor.
The prime example being the Ujjwala Yojana.
The LTG gas cylinder scheme.
Right.
For millions upon millions of women in rural India, this was life-changing. They went from cooking on smoky, unhealthy wood or dung fires to clean LPG gas. This wasn't an abstract economic reform. This was a direct improvement in their daily health and quality of life.
And that really solidified the female vote, didn't it?
It locked it in.
Right.
And then in 2018, you have Ayushman Bharat,
The health insurance.
the world's largest public health insurance program, providing coverage to hundreds of millions of the poorest Indians. So if you're a voter at a village, you're not thinking about GDP numbers. You're thinking, Modi gave my wife a gas cylinder, he gave my family a toilet under the Swachh Bharat mission, he gave us a bank account, and now he's giving us health insurance.
It created this new political category, the Labharthi Varj, the beneficiary class.
Exactly. A constituency of voters who felt a direct personal connection to the prime minister because of these welfare schemes. And this was all interwoven with a strong dose of nationalism, especially on the security front, like the surgical strikes conducted against Pakistan after the Uri attack.
But even with all this, by the end of 2018, the source notes that there were some warning signs for the BJP, some political headwinds.
There were. The Modi magic seemed to be fading a little. The economic disruptions had taken their toll. Rural distress was a real issue. Unemployment was rising. And the BJP actually lost 3 key state elections in the Hindi heartland in late 2018.
The opposition was starting to feel like they had a chance in the upcoming 2019 general election.
For a moment, it really looked like it might be a close fight.
And then came 2019, segment 4, The mandate for majoritarian confidence, this election. It felt so different from 2014. If 2014 was a campaign of hope, 2019 felt as it was about something else entirely.
2019 was about assertion and, above all else, national security.
And the pivot point was a single event in February of that year, the Pulwama terror attack.
A suicide bomber attacked a convoy of paramilitary police in Kashmir, killing 40 of them. The entire nation was gripped by grief and outrage, and Modi's response was swift and muscular.
The Balakot airstrikes.
They sent Indian Air Force jets deep into Pakistani territory to strike an alleged terrorist training camp. Whether it was successful or not is still debated, but that didn't matter politically.
It completely changed the narrative.
They wiped the slate clean. Suddenly, no one was talking about unemployment or farm prices anymore. The entire election was reframed around a single question: who is the strongest leader to keep India safe?
And Modi projected himself as the chakadar, the watchman.
Your watchman is vigilant. The campaign became visceral, deeply emotional, and intensely nationalistic.
And the result was even bigger than the 2014 wave.
It was a tsunami. The BJP, on its own, surged to 303 seats. The broader NDA coalition hit 353. It was an even more powerful mandate than the first one. It was effectively the country saying, we trust you completely, do what you think is best.
And they took that mandate and ran with it. The source says the ideological agenda was fast-tracked. Looking at the second half of 2019, it's like they had a 50-year-old checklist and they were just ticking off the boxes one by one.
It was a political blitzkrieg. It started in August 2019 with Article 370.
The constitutional provision that gave special semi-autonomous status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
And a core promise of the BJP's platform for its entire existence was to revoke it. They did it overnight. They put the state under lockdown, arrested political leaders, and passed a law in Parliament to abrogate Article 370 and split the state into two federally controlled union territories.
An incredible assertion of central power.
A message that national integration was non-negotiable. Then, just a few months later, in November 2019, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict in the long-running Ram Mandir dispute,
clearing the path for a grand Hindu temple to be built at a site in Ayodhya that had been contested for centuries.
This was the emotional core of the Hindu nationalist movement, and with the court's blessing, the path was now clear.
And then, to cap off the year, in December 2019, they passed the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act.
This was probably the most controversial move of all. The law offered an expedited path to Indian citizenship for religious minorities, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Christians, who had fled persecution from the neighboring Muslim-majority countries of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan.
But it explicitly excluded Muslims.
It did, and critics argued that for the first time it introduced a religious test for Indian citizenship, which they said violated the secular foundations of the Constitution. The government's position was that it was a humanitarian measure for persecuted minorities.
And this act triggered massive nationwide protests. Shaheen Bagh in Delhi became a symbol of resistance.
It polarized the country in a way that few things had before. But if you look at those three actions together, the decision on Kashmir, the Supreme Court verdict on Ayodhya, and the new Citizenship Act, they represented the triumphant fulfillment of the BJP's core cultural nationalist agenda. It solidified their base and sent a clear message about the direction the country was heading in.
So by early 2020, Modi is at the absolute zenith of his power. He seems completely invincible. And then the world changed.
The great black swan event of our time, COVID-19.
Which brings us to segment 5, pandemic, protests, and resilience. The source is very nuanced in its analysis of this period. It starts with the lockdown on March 25, 2020.
One of the strictest, most sudden lockdowns anywhere in the world, announced with just 4 hours' notice.
And the economic toll was brutal. The GDP contracted by 6.6% that fiscal year. But the image that is seared into everyone's memory is that of the migrant workers.
It was a humanitarian tragedy. Millions of daily wage laborers in the big cities, their jobs gone overnight, with no way to pay rent or buy food, began walking hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers back to their home villages because all public transport had been shut down.
It was a brutal exposure of the vulnerabilities of India's vast informal economy, something we saw a glimpse of during demonetization.
Exactly. It laid bare the fragility of life for so many.
And yet, surprisingly, Modi's personal popularity ratings didn't collapse.
They didn't, which is where the resilience part of the segment title comes in. He managed the narrative very effectively. He framed the lockdown as a necessary collective sacrifice. He rallied the nation around this call for a Atmanirbhar Bharat, a self-reliant India.
turning the crisis into an opportunity for domestic manufacturing.
And then, of course, came the vaccines. This was, by most accounts, a huge success story.
The scale of the vaccination drive was just immense.
Over 1.7 billion doses administered. India developed its own indigenous vaccine, Covaxin, and mass-produced the AstraZeneca vaccine as Covishield. And the digital platform they built to manage it, Cowin, actually worked remarkably well. They vaccinated a massive population faster than many much richer nations.
But we can't talk about this period without discussing the devastating second wave in the spring of 2021. The source uses the word apocalyptic.
It was a nightmare. The healthcare system was completely overwhelmed. There were desperate shortages of hospital beds, of medicine, and most tragically of oxygen. It was a very dark time for the country, and it led to intense debate over the true number of excess deaths.
And yet, politically, the bigger challenge to Modi's authority during this period didn't come from the virus, it came from the farmers.
The Farm Laws Saga. This is a crucial chapter in the story, because it's the first and only time in his tenure that Modi was forced into a major public retreat.
He had introduced 3 new laws aimed at liberalizing the agricultural sector. The idea was to allow farmers to sell their produce to private corporations outside the government-regulated wholesale markets, the mandis.
On paper, it's reform that many economists had advocated for years to bring market principles into a highly regulated sector.
But the farmers, particularly the powerful farming unions from Punjab and Haryana, saw it very differently.
They saw it as the beginning of the end of the government's price support system, the MSP. They feared it would leave them at the mercy of big corporations. So they marched on the capital, Delhi, and set up protest camps at its borders.
And they stayed there for over a year.
Through a brutal winter, a scorching summer, and the peak of the COVID pandemic, it was an incredibly sustained and disciplined protest. And in November 2021, on the eve of important state elections, Modi went on television and, in a stunning reversal, announced he was repealing all 3 laws.
He apologized to the nation.
He did. It was a shock to everyone. The strong man had backed down. The source calls it a rare instance of Modi rolling back policy due to public pressure. It was a powerful reminder that even with a massive parliamentary majority, street power and organized protest could still force the government's hand.
Okay, let's move into the next phase, 2022 to 2023. The source calls this the paradox of ascent and tension. It really does feel like a period of split screens. On one screen, you have these incredible moments of national achievement. India is literally going to the moon.
Chandrayaan-3, the successful landing of a rover near the south pole of the moon. It was a moment of immense national pride and a huge validation of India's space program, ISRO. It positioned India as a serious global scientific power.
And then you have the G20 summit in Delhi in 2023.
This was Modi's Vishwaguru moment, the world teacher. He played host to all the world's leaders. It was a huge diplomatic success. He managed to hammer out a consensus joint declaration, which was remarkable given the divisions over the war in Ukraine.
And he successfully championed the African Union's inclusion as a permanent member.
A major diplomatic win that positioned India as the undisputed leader of the global South. And on the domestic front, his government finally passed the Women's Reservation Bill, a landmark piece of legislation reserving 33% of seats in parliament for women.
So that's one screen, India, ascendant on the world stage, pushing through historic reforms. But on the other screen, the tension.
Yes. The source details a parallel narrative. During this same period, you see a continued decline in India's rankings on global indices for press freedom and democratic norms.
There were widespread accusations that the government's enforcement agencies, the ED and the CBI, were being used to systematically target opposition politicians.
The process is the punishment, became the common refrain. Key opposition figures were tied up in investigations or jailed right before crucial elections.
And then there was the situation in Manipur.
A brutal months-long ethnic conflict in the northeastern state of Manipur between 2 communities. The criticism was that the central government was too slow to intervene and that the prime minister himself remained silent on the issue for a very long time.
So you have this perfect summary from the source. India appearing simultaneously ascendant and internally contested, a rising power abroad, but with growing fissures at home.
And that's the complex backdrop against which the country headed into the 2024 general election.
The climax of our story so far, segment 7, a return to coalition realities.
Coming into 2024, I don't think anyone seriously believed the BJP could lose. The question was only about the margin of victory.
The slogan was, Ab ki bar 400 pair, this time over 400 seats.
It was an audacious goal. And the campaign was supercharged by the emotional consecration ceremony of the Ram Temple in Ayodhya in January 2024. It felt less like an election campaign and more like a victory lap, a coronation.
All the pundits, the media, the pre-election polls, and even the exit polls on voting day, everyone was predicting another massive landslide.
Everyone.
But then came June 4th, 2024, the day of the count.
And it was the day the music stopped. As the numbers started trickling in, it quickly became clear that something was very wrong with the 400-pair narrative.
The BJP wasn't crossing 400. It wasn't even crossing 350 or 300.
It stopped at 240 seats.
240, which is a full 32 seats short of the 272 needed for a simple majority.
That was the headline that stunned the nation and the world. For the first time in 10 years, Narendra Modi's party did not have a majority on its own.
Now, to be clear, his NDA coalition did win. Their total was 293 seats, which was comfortably above the majority mark. And he formed the government. He became the first prime minister since Nehru to win 3 consecutive terms.
Which is a historic achievement in itself, make no mistake.
But the nature of his power was fundamentally altered in that one day. He was no longer the undisputed emperor. He was now dependent on coalition allies to stay in power.
And not just any allies. The 2 biggest partners were the TDP, led by N. Chandrababu Naidu, and the JDU, led by Nitish Kumar. These are crafty, veteran politicians who are masters of coalition politics. They know how to drive a hard bargain.
So what happened? Why the big drop? The source points to bread-and-butter economic issues.
It seemed so. It was a classic case of the macro versus the micro. The overall GDP numbers looked great. India was the fastest-growing major economy. But on the ground, people were struggling with high inflation, especially food prices, and a persistent lack of high-quality jobs for young people.
The Vikas narrative didn't land as well.
It seems the voters delivered a very nuanced verdict. They said, yes, we want you as our prime minister, but we don't want to give you a blank check anymore. We want you to be checked. We want more accountability. It was a vote for a stronger opposition.
Which brings us to the present day. Segment 8. 2025-2026, the era of reform amid restraint.
And it's a fascinating dynamic. You might have expected a coalition government to lead to policy paralysis, a return to the old days. But the source notes that, surprisingly, 2025 was branded by the government as the year of reforms.
They managed to pass a new Simplified Income Tax Act, replacing the ancient law from 1961.
A major, long-pending reform. They also worked with the GST Council to rationalize the tax tiers, another big structural fix. They pushed ahead with modernizing the labor codes and liberalizing FDI in the insurance sector.
So the big Viksit Bharat at 2047 developed India by 2047 agenda is still on track.
It is. But the style of governance has had to change dramatically. The source describes it as a constant balancing act. Modi can no longer just announce a disruptive unilateral policy like demonetization or the farm laws.
There's more consultation now.
Much more. He has to manage the demands of his allies who have their own regional priorities and ideological positions. There are debates about federalism, about caste-based reservations, about special status for states that he now has to navigate with much more care and consensus building.
It's the consensus Modi having to emerge from the shadow of the conviction Modi.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And so the focus is shifted towards things that are less politically contentious but still have a high impact. Massive infrastructure projects, nuclear power, renewable energy, high-speed rail, building the AI ecosystem, expanding the digital public infrastructure.
And what about his position on the global stage?
Still walking that very careful tightrope, deepening the strategic partnership with the United States, while trying to maintain the historically strong relationship with Russia, and of course managing the extremely tense and volatile border situation with China.
Okay, so let's try and put a bow on this. Let's pull the lens back and move to our final segment, segment 9. Assessing the legacy, transformation versus tension. Looking back at this entire 12-year arc, what's the verdict from the source?
Well, the source does a great job of laying out the 2 competing narratives, the 2 very different ways of viewing this era.
View of the supporters.
The supporters see a leader who fundamentally transformed India's hardware and its software. The hardware is the tangible stuff, the world-class highways, the new airports, the speed of rail construction. The software is the digital stack, the UPI payment system, the direct benefit transfers that deliver welfare to the poor without the corruption and leaks of the old system.
And a restoration of national pride.
And a restoration of what they call civilizational pride, a sense that India is no longer a hesitant apologetic power, but a confident nation that has reclaimed its rightful place in the world.
And the opponent's view.
The opponents see the enormous cost of that transformation. They argue that while the hardware may have improved, the very operating system of Indian democracy has been eroded. They point to the democratic backsliding, the weakening of institutions like the media and the judiciary, the increasing alienation of religious minorities, and the dangerous centralization of power in one man's office.
And on the economy.
They argue that the economic gains have been deeply uneven. A K-shaped recovery, where the rich have gotten fabulously richer, while the poor and the lower middle class have struggled with stagnant wages and high unemployment.
The source ends its analysis by posing three big, open-ended questions for history to judge. I think these are the perfect metrics to think about. Number one, has economic growth translated into broad-based prosperity?
That's the equity question. Did the rising tide lift all boats, or just the yachts?
Number two, has the assertion of national pride strengthened or weakened India's pluralistic harmony?
That's the social fabric question. Can you be a strong, confident Hindu-majority nation while also protecting the rights and security of all your diverse communities?
And finally, number three, are India's democratic institutions stronger or more fragile after this era?
That's the core democracy question. When Modi eventually leaves the political stage, will the institutions, the courts, the press, the election commission, the civil service be robust and independent enough to stand on their own?
The source's final conclusion is that Modi's tenure represents a tectonic shift, not just a political wave.
I think that's undeniable. By 2026, he is the longest-serving non-Congress prime minister in India's history. He has fundamentally altered the center of gravity of Indian politics. Even the opposition now has to play on his terms. They have to engage with the themes of Hinduism, nationalism, and welfare delivery that he has championed. He has rewritten the language of Indian politics.
It really has been an incredible journey to trace, from the message of hope and the use of holograms in 2014 to the assertion of national will in airstrikes in 2019, all the way to the new reality of coalition and compromise in 2026.
It's the story of the evolution of a leader and in many ways the story of the evolution of a democracy under pressure.
And I want to leave our listeners with the final provocative thought from the source because I think it perfectly captures the stakes. It says, as India moves toward its goal of being a developed nation by 2047, the ultimate legacy of the Modi era won't be the electoral victories or the highways. It will be whether the disruption of the last decade matures into a durable democratic transformation. Can a system built so intensely around one persona adapt to the necessity of consensus?
That is the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Can Modism survive without Modi, or does the system revert to its mean? We're all watching that answer unfold in real time.
A tectonic shift indeed. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.